we are now in this place where if somebody were to rent an electric vehicle next week and they would just go for a random road trip in any direction, maybe they just let fate decide and they will make it. But the thing is that if they don't prepare the right apps and subscriptions, then they might end up paying 200% of the price compared to using another product.
Hello and welcome to In Between Charges, the perfect podcast to listen to while waiting for your EV to charge. I am Kevin Spangenberg and am joined, as always, by my co-host, Mike Hawks. Mike, any road trips planned this summer?
Not this European summer, but this Australian summer. We're planning a trip over to Australia and we're going to try to spend Christmas Day in Byron Bay. And so I was just checking out some of the charge points beforehand. And there's about 10 charge points, mainly by ChargeFox out there. So that's going to be the trip. We're going to try and get out there, make it all the way, even the kind of surf capital.
I spoke to ChargeFox a while back and early days in Australia.
But early days. That was like a year back or so. And now they've rolled out some charge points pretty well. I think we're going to talk about pricing, but it seemed pretty fair there. Yeah.
I think I'm going to take a little road trip in the U.S., actually, from Wyoming to Mount Rushmore to go look at these great presidents and everything. Going to go to Deadwood. Have you known the show Deadwood? It's a famous old casino in South Dakota. Yep. So I'm going to do a little driving myself, I think. That one's going to be tougher with an EV, I'll tell you that much.
Do you feel the range anxiety or is it complete bullshit?
There might be some range anxiety in South Dakota. There might be some range anxiety in Wyoming and South Dakota, I will fully admit.
But we've got someone who likes to drive a lot.
Oh, we have someone who likes to drive. But really, no matter whether you are American or you're in Australia or you're in Europe, the summer road trip is an iconic event. So we thought with the summer holidays coming up, and surely are already underway for many of you listening, we needed to do an especially relevant episode as families everywhere are hopping in the EV and they're hitting the road for that annual trip. And today we have the perfect guest to discuss the evolution of the summer road trip into an electric affair. Our guest is Felix Hamer. Felix is an EV travel hacker with a major online following across multiple platforms where he is always sharing the best charging tips and general EV industry knowledge from all across Europe and the globe. Felix is on the road a lot and was even on the road when I first spoke with him about a month ago about doing this show. He was quite literally in between charges. Well, he was charging, but so if you're in between charges, you would actually be driving.
You're in between road trips.
You would be driving. It was at a charger somewhere around Europe. But today we're excited to dive into the details of charging on the go and why your charging experience around Europe can vary quite widely in terms of quality, pricing, and all the things associated with it. And we want to help people kind of navigate and understand what goes into the summer EV road trip, like a pro, like Felix. So Felix, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Very happy to be here.
Good. So let's just maybe start at the beginning here, Felix. How does one become an EV travel hacker? How did your journey begin and end up to today where you're speaking on a podcast as an EV travel hacker?
There were sort of two moments that happened in the past that got me here. So they connect a bit because one was that there were shared vehicles introduced into the city of Amsterdam where I grew up and still live. And thanks to some luck, I got introduced to the car sharing. And actually, they had this special deal where if you plug them in when they were at a certain percentage, back then it was 30%, then you got 3 minutes to use it afterwards. So this was sort of my first ride hacking experience because I could just plug them in and Amsterdam was just building a charging network. And this way I found out how charging actually worked. And I had the benefit of living downtown where pretty much all of Amsterdam's chargers were downtown. So within minutes from my house, I could plug in on all sides. And many people didn't know about the deal, etc. You still see this today. But then even more important than the car sharing that happened back then was that in 2017, I tried an electric motorbike. And that was such a mind-blowing experience on so many levels that it changed the course of my life, really. Because, I just became obsessed about the infrastructure around charging because I realized, thanks to this motorbike that had such a tiny battery, yet it could fast charge, that actually the infrastructure, that is the end game for electric mobility. You can see this today. There's a lot of talk about electric trucks, yet pretty much the only topic is where do they charge? Because anyone can take an electric truck anywhere if they could just charge on the way. Sure, it would take a bit longer than a diesel truck, maybe, because you maybe need a bit more time than the rest periods. But the thing is just that the infrastructure is, in my opinion, the end game. So when I took the same motorbike to Switzerland, I found out that I could only do the trip thanks to some Lidl chargers on the way in the charging desert of northern France. And these Lidl chargers, they were a service to Lidl customers, but not a charging service per se. It wasn't even paid. And the thing is that they closed when the shops are closed. And these shops in France, they close on Sunday. So that meant that road trip wasn't feasible on a Sunday because the plugs weren't there. These things happened to me sort of. They made me go crazy about just finding out which companies are involved with this. Why are they doing it? How are they doing it? Why is there so much difference in charging hardware?
But Felix, when was it that you took this trip? Because it sounds like the infrastructure was in a very different place to where it is today. You were mentioning already the charging infrastructure in the Netherlands was, they're essentially trying to incentivize it for free, but for some reason couldn't get that message out to the population, which seems a little bit counterintuitive for me. And I guess also you're talking about the kind of chicken and egg, which is people don't want to purchase an EV necessarily because there's not enough charging infrastructure, but also there's not enough charging infrastructure because there's not enough EVs out on the road. So it's very difficult for businesses to be able to justify the level of investment. When was it that you took this motorbike journey?
This was in 2017 that I tried it out. And then in 2018, I did several bigger trips with that motorbike. It was a rental motorbike. And the infrastructure difference between 2018 and today, especially around Europe, is very intense. You cannot compare the landscape back then to today.
So are you able to charge on a Sunday in France now? Is that possible?
Exactly. So the charging desert of France has sort of moved to other places because you can still, even today in France, there's a difference in infrastructure depending on where you go. You know, if you go to Paris, there's way more chargers there than in your average French city, perhaps. But yeah, what they did there with the highway tenders, suddenly, if you're at a French rest stop with a big gas station, right next to the big gas station, there's suddenly a big charging station.
So let's maybe talk about how things have changed a little bit, because back then you're talking about a lack of infrastructure. 6-7 years ago, just trying to get the infrastructure in place so you don't have to stop at a Lidl or rely on French labor laws.
Don't shit on the little guys. They are the biggest. Pardon the pun.
Well, Lidl, true, but Lidl.
They're the biggest DC network operator.
We saw a report the other day that was Lidl is maybe the largest operator in all of Europe. Is it public, fully public? I don't fully know, but it is a major CPO, is Lidl. And it kind of makes sense because they have so many locations, but it also isn't immediately intuitive because they're not a pure play CPO. So, but 6-7 years ago, you're talking about infrastructure and reliability there and just the abundance of it or lack thereof. And now here we are in 2024, and it seems like what you're primarily focusing on is pricing, right? So now it's not where is the charger, it's why is it priced a certain way. So can you talk about that shift in focus, I guess? Is that because the infrastructure has reached such a level that now we need to think about this a little bit further beyond just simple abundance, and kind of why you're really focusing on pricing at this moment in time?
Yeah, so what happened thanks to the motorbike trip is that I started looking for, can I actually rent an electric car instead of my diesel car? Because the reason I was renting diesel cars for my road trips was the affordability of the per kilometer usage of a diesel car. And the thing is that I found out that if you used the right charging card at the right charger, there were some amazing charging deals out there. For example, a player like Ionity back in 2019, you could just unlock any charger for €8 and just leave it there and, you know, stay for an hour, fill it up, and €8 was all you had to pay. So that was a huge incentive to use their chargers. So it just shows you that in 5 years, these things have changed so much that it's just hard to believe. If you buy your first EV next week, you will never realize because we were never there, but that's totally fine because the thing is that the landscape as it was of course not mass market ready.
Maybe quick question, just as kind of coming back to Kevin's point, it sounds like you have found these very kind of specific ways, almost by mix and matching, to try to find the best deals. But I mean, why do you think that's an important topic? Is it something that you're trying to raise awareness of because you believe there is an adoption hurdle when it comes to charging prices? Or Is it more you're trying to challenge the B2B model, for example, about how business are actually setting those prices? Because we know that interoperability is a big focus within Europe, and it's still a big challenge for many different software providers and CPOs to be able to actually present fair prices as a result of competition between the companies. So what is it that drives you to find out these different changes and nuances and, communicate it and put it out on various social media platforms?
I think one of the most important things is simply to really educate the audience on the fact that many times fast charging will be compared to fueling up. And this simply makes no sense because there is no connection between the two. Clearly, many gas stations will offer chargers because they're in the right place, and this makes total sense. But that doesn't suddenly make charging into fueling up. It simply isn't. And the whole reality of a kilowatt hour being so vastly different to a liter of whatever petrol you want to use, clearly nobody will ever give away petrol because the value is sort of decided upon when you purchase is as a seller. And the thing is, with a kilowatt hour, we all know that this market, you cannot compare it to a fuel market. So there's just so many possibilities. And of course, there's also not one solution. So from the very beginning, in the early days, there were some charging cards that had a good deal in certain places. And you can see that because today charging networks have developed so much, if we're looking at a player like Ionity or a Lidl or a Fastnet, all of them now have so much more to offer that they can offer subscriptions to us. They have their own apps that offer way more than they ever did in the past. They can offer trip planning in their apps. So you can just see that there's no comparison between fueling and charging.
You can do a collaboration with UnoX and get the single DKK price per kilowatt hour. I've seen you've been posting a lot about that. I think that was pretty...
Yeah, and I love how the simplicity of such a deal for me is really... Okay, so from my first road trips forwarding to today, a lot of things have changed and charging has become faster and in some places more affordable. But really, if I travel today, then most of the time, I'm still looking to find where is the actual charge. As soon as I'm not in France, it will be quite a puzzle to actually find the physical charger. And also just this, why is there still such a lack of signage? This is why I like the UnoX deal so much and why I like to share it, because they have these huge pricing totems where they show their fuel prices and the kilowatt hour price right next to it. And I think that just this essence of showing how much cheaper a kilowatt hour is to a liter of fuel.
So Felix, tell us a little bit about your price hunting strategy. As you're road tripping around Europe, you were just in Spain, you're coming up to Denmark and Sweden here in a couple of weeks. What's your strategy? You get in the car, do you have a million different apps and a million different cards, or what are you doing and how do you identify the best prices and know where to go and charge?
Yeah, so this is great that you ask, because I was always thinking that with time, things would get maybe easier, maybe some bigger players would take over. And locally, we can see that that has sort of happened. So in a lot of markets, you can see that there are some huge players and then many smaller ones. But this is really the crazy part, that actually if I go down to Spain, which I did 2 weeks ago, compared to when I will go to Sweden 2 weeks from now, this is such a different experience in every way. Indeed, I need very different apps for the trip to Sweden compared to for the trip to Spain. And ideally, of course, that is absolutely not where we would like to be, because we are now in this place where if somebody were to rent an electric vehicle next week and they would just go for a random road trip in any direction, maybe they just let fate decide, then clearly they will make it anywhere. If they start from Berlin or if they start from Vienna, they can go down to the south of Italy, they can go down to the south of Spain, and they will make it. But the thing is that if they don't prepare the right apps and subscriptions, then they might end up paying 200% of the price compared to using another product. And this is a bit sad to see that it's such a mess, I would say. But luckily, there are some helpful tools out there. So the route planning apps got way better than they were. And there's a couple of apps like Charge Finder, like Charge Price, that are really useful, especially if you haven't been to where you're going. Then these tools can really help you to see, okay, what local players are there. What I just don't get is that when you arrive at a charger today, the charger might communicate a price. Your charging card will offer a different price. What is the best charging card there? Well, you will need tools to figure this out. What are we actually doing here? Is somebody winning when this is the situation? So, yeah, I sort of love it because it keeps my puzzling gamification mania alive. I want to feel like we're mass market ready yesterday in Europe to everybody go electric tomorrow. And then I look at the reality and I'm like, well, maybe not tomorrow.
So Monta has a charging app. We see kind of behind the scenes, behind the charger a little bit, like what goes into these bilateral agreements, these relationships between networks that determine what price is charged and where and why. And it gets pretty complex. And I don't want to just like hand wave it away and say, oh, Felix, you wouldn't understand, or oh, everyday EV driver, you wouldn't understand. It's complex, because I agree. We want this to be simple for customers or for EV drivers. We want it to be straightforward. Here's what you're going to pay. But when you talk about hundreds of different networks across Europe and different tariff levels in different ways, and they're speaking to each other, different protocols and everything, it kind of all adds up to a pretty difficult thing to manage.
It's actually nice that you mention your own app, because on my last winter journey towards Sweden, I did a lunch charge with the Monta app, and it was the cheapest 100 kilowatt plus charging I ever did during lunchtime. And it was walking distance from a great Danish sandwich place just in some village out there nearby the highway.
Oh.
And I love that at least being able to download one local app that gives instant access to these dynamic prices that are one click away. That helps, and people will probably, even if you have to go through a couple of countries to reach your destination, clearly anybody holidaying in Europe will probably spend most of their holiday, either in Spain or in Sweden. But if then one app gets them around Spain or Sweden, this is not a bad place to be.
No. So Felix, if you were to take a road trip from the most expensive country in Europe to charge to the least expensive country, what would that road trip look like?
I wish it was that easy, but definitely, generally speaking, something very weird is going on. I think if you look at the European market, where Germany offers more fast chargers than anywhere else, that should be the most competitive market. But then also they have some of the highest prices of Europe, especially if you simply, nowadays there are quite some chargers where you could just swipe your card or use your phone with a payment terminal. Man, in Germany, that can easily cost you nearly €1 per kilowatt hour at a random highway spot. If you compare this to Denmark today, then swiping the same credit card at a random fast charger nearby the highway could easily cost half as much. And if you go to a country like Spain, you see that prices there are way better than a country like Italy, which, if you look at it from a distance, this doesn't make a lot of sense. If you look at a market like France, highway prices are way better than Germany. And if you go up all the way to Sweden or Norway, it depends a lot on the player, but there are competitive prices around. But it will depend a lot on your payment method and also time of day, etc. So really, the picture is just so wild, and it doesn't go in one direction either. And this fascinates me a lot, because if you would have told me, let's say 5 years ago, that charging in Denmark would be significantly cheaper than charging in Germany, I would have just laughed at you so hard. And this is today's market reality. And that, for me, visiting Denmark, as a Dutch person, I just feel poor visiting Denmark because everything feels more expensive than I'm used to, except for charging. And this is so weird, because walking into a German supermarket I feel like king of the world. But then I go to the fast charger and it tries to rip me off. Like, what is going on here?
You're like,
so yeah, it is just super wild.
I can shop at Lidl and pay nothing, but in the parking lot, I'm getting taken to the cleaners out in the parking lot.
Their fast chargers are some of the most competitive ones in Germany, so let's give them that.
Okay.
But right opposite from the Lidl, there will be a gas station operating at twice the price. And people are charging there. I cannot wrap my head around this, that I see these expensive chargers in Germany and people still use them. And I would just say, what are you doing? But they're using them.
Felix, I am American, and a lot of the discourse in America is around reliability and uptime. And can this charger take my payment? And can it actually execute a charge? Are the chargers working over here in Europe all the time? When was the last time you had a failed charge? How frequently would you say that happens? Or are we at a more elevated level of discourse here in Europe where we can talk about really advanced things like pricing because we know the charger's going to work?
I feel when looking from a distance to the American market, I really want to do an American EV road trip, but I haven't. So cannot speak from experience, but I follow a lot of people who do a lot of road tripping there. It feels to me a bit like I'm watching Europe some years ago, but then it doesn't really match up because clearly the chargers aren't 50 kilowatt chargers, but there is a reliability issue. And then the thing is also that, of course, in America, there's simply so little infrastructure. If you look at the market in America and you can see, let's pretend that Tesla has half of the fast charging market of America, that just tells you, yeah, if all the other players are only competing about half of the pie, if you look at a random market in Europe, let's say France, Tesla is a big player, but one of many. And there are players with triple the amount of locations that Tesla has. So it's super hard to compare them. And the painful part is really that they cannot expect things to work. And then the pressure on all these chargers is higher because there is too little of them. So people are buying EVs. And then there's way too little competition in the charging market. So everybody's going to the same Electrify America charger that gets a lot of usage. So if you don't send a mechanic there every other month, then things will simply go wrong and some cable cutting will happen and some bad weather will happen. There's hardly a roof anywhere in the States protecting these chargers, which is obviously stupid. It is so wild looking at these things. And luckily in Europe, we are now at a moment where I don't fear a charger not working ever, even though I do run into not working chargers quite regularly still. But the thing is, this matters very little if there's 10 of them next to each other and you just take one of the other 9 and only 4 of them are in use anyway.
Felix, what are some more practical tips for people that are hitting the road with an EV around Europe? What are a couple of tips you might have for them to have the best charging experience or maybe the most affordable charging experience around Europe?
Now we're in this moment where there are some big players around. So to investigate where you're going compared to who is sort of the market leader there, I think could be just the easiest way to make your road trip more smooth. You know, if you're visiting the Netherlands, then a Fastnet subscription simply makes sense. If you're visiting Spain, a Zunder subscription could make a lot of sense. And if you do a huge road trip in Europe, Tesla and Ionity subscriptions, probably it could even be sensible to take the both of them because that gives you the freedom to charge at more places at better prices. And all of these deals, these subscriptions, what really has gotten much better than a while ago is that almost all subscriptions are now monthly. So if you go on one big trip per year, you can be on one subscription per year, 1 month, and leave it again. I think that these are some of the simplest tricks to use. Fast charging subscriptions are one of these things that are really taking off in a way that I didn't suspect a couple of years ago. And this is partly due to the fact that we haven't seen fleet growth in all of Europe as we have seen network growth. So countries like Germany and France have seen market growth in fast charging that I, as a fan, didn't expect to happen at this rate and this scale, but it actually happened. So these subscriptions are also happening because these companies need us to charge there, because otherwise these chargers are just there waiting for nobody to visit. And this is, to me, very interesting when visiting, luckily I'm going soon again, a place like Denmark, or Sweden, where fleet growth has been massive, charging growth has been okay, which actually shows you that in Denmark, I've seen some of the busiest charging locations of my whole life. And yeah, if you would have told me that 5 years ago, then I would have just laughed in your face again so hard, because there was nothing happening at the time when I was visiting Denmark 5 years ago.
I wonder if you had a point of view on Alpitronic and its development in the market. So I know we've talked a lot about prices from an EV driver's point of view, from the operator point of view as well, about how to make fair prices, some kind of tips, etc. But maybe how about from the manufacturer's point of view? I think it is a very competitive market. There's lots of European manufacturers. There's a ton of manufacturers in Shenzhen. There's a lot more now that's popping up within the US. And it is an absolute rush to be able to get these charge points in the ground. And we think that once they're in the ground, they'll have somewhere between 8 to 12 years of lifetime value, possibly longer if you maintain it well. So it's a huge business to be able to get this in. And Alpitronic somehow has managed to command a very strong share of the DC market most recently, right? It's a relatively small company based out of northern Italy, and now it has almost more than 50% of the charging market. We work with a company called Vigo. It's a taxi company here. It only has electric cars, and they have some of the highest utilized charge points here for their taxi drivers, and those are Alpitronic charge points as well. I wonder if you had a point of view on the Alpitronic case and also the market from manufacturers.
It's very cool that you mentioned them, because I still remember when Fastnet put out one of their chargers very close to Amsterdam many, many years ago now. And I had no idea what was coming. It looked good, but there was no expectation. I was just charging all over Europe all the time. And I had so many unreliable experiences. No matter where I went, no matter what hardware I used, I've had bad experiences with pretty much any manufacturer out there that supplies hardware around Europe. And there are a couple of exceptions, but only a couple. And one of them is Alpitronic. Yeah, I think that what happened there is really, they had been working on that product for a long time. They got a company like Fastnet to put it out in public testing, which is the way Fastnet does things. They will just buy some hardware, put it out there, and just see, not some lab testing. No, the lab is the field. And that is, I think, the most important, that this is not some kind of PowerPoint company that offers the fastest charger. They weren't even offering the fastest charger. When they came to market with their hypercharger, that wasn't as fast as Ionity chargers that were already out there for a while. And that was scaling up to be Europe's biggest and fastest network. They weren't even as fast. But what I love about these machines the most is that they changed this whole game of putting one charger in. You don't want one plug ever to be your end game. The thing is that they came up with this one charger with two plugs. It just means that even these stupid companies installing one charger offer two plugs. And this has been such a game changer in itself, because if you put in two of those, then boom, you have a 4-plug station. Imagine the difference from one with one cable. So I think that is really one of these essential things that so many people still miss, is simply this architecture of building for versatility and being able to scale the charging up and down, being able to offer different speeds to different vehicles. This is the flexibility that I wanted from many other players for so long. And then, of course, they come in there with this reliability factor. They have this beautiful light around the plug that just already gives you this sign like, this is going to be good because it's a green light. And yeah, clearly this hardware has proven to be reliable in itself. But clearly, some of that reliability was also thanks to Fastnet installing many of their first ones. And what you see at a Fastnet station is it almost always has a roof. So the machine is always protected and it's always well maintained. This sort of didn't come as a surprise for me, because actually the fast charging game is really about maintenance.
You mentioned Fastnet a couple of times there, and I maybe wanted to use that example to talk just briefly a little bit more broadly about charging companies and their profitability and their performance in the stock market a little bit. I saw you had an interaction the other day on Twitter/X. I might have chimed in a little bit. Somebody asked you, they said, Felix, why is the Fastnet stock just a red line down to the right? And people are kind of wondering because this is one of the companies that is profitable, actually. And then somebody was questioning whether they're well-financed. And then the CEO was like, no, we're well-financed. We're good for the next couple of years. And he's like kind of wondering why the stock, I would be wondering if I was working at Fastnet, why our stock isn't doing very well. And you look at the stocks of other companies in the USA, there's quite a few. Allego just had to delist from the New York Stock Exchange, Electrify America, EVgo, ChargePoint. But the Fastnet CEO is like, it's almost as if people aren't aware that this transition is happening or something, right? And they're one of the leaders and they're profitable and they're well-financed. And so do you maybe have a couple of thoughts on why some of these charging companies aren't doing very well in the stock market? Why maybe investors haven't kind of caught on to CPOs being strong, successful, profitable businesses? Because certainly some of them are at this point in time.
Yeah, clearly we're still so early days. And this is, I guess, a bit of this weirdness that we're experiencing sort of a lag, and also why for many years I've simply been advocating for more plugs. You know, one of my favorite hashtags is that simple, because for many years, we, the electric car drivers, simply needed more plugs. But right now, you can see that with everybody offering their own subscription, they actually need more users. So first of all, the investments needed to build a serious charging network are clearly huge. And then to actually make money, you need a lot of EV drivers. So that market is so important that if you look at Germany right now, then I look at statistics for charging stations all the time, and you can just see that many of these stations don't have the amount of visitors they need to make that work. And luckily, Fastnet is one of these companies that they really scale when they measure that it's needed. So they do things very differently from a company like Tesla that just throws big charging parks out there and then can also, of course, algorithmically push their own fleet there. But with Fastnet, you can see that they opened some of these stations in Germany, and only the ones that are hugely successful have now tripled in size in just 5 years. So Fastnet has actually done several operations on several German stations where they actually grew that station 3 times in a row already, you know, let's say every summer, every winter. If they measure this peak usage being high enough for them to go up, they will go up. But I think in many cases, there have also been companies, some of which you mentioned, that were just throwing chargers out there. And if you don't have a good way of getting visitors there, then yeah, just installing hardware, that's not going to get you there.
Yeah.
And that's why I like a player like Fastnet so much, because if you open their app, the amount of care that has gone into their app is just huge, and it doesn't stop. And it still gets better. You know, it's way better this year than 2 years ago when it was already good. But the thing is that the whole picture has to match. And luckily, we have a couple of players like Fastnet, but also Recharge in the Nordics that actually share the usage and that even share the financials because they're listed and whatever. So luckily, we have a couple of these insightful players. But if you then follow Bloomberg, then they will show you this fast charging business around the world. And they have to take out 5 of the biggest players of China to even make a European player show up in the statistics. So it just shows you that as a total market, we're still so tiny.
You hit on a really good point there in that it's not a matter of just throwing plugs in the ground or throwing a charger in the ground and then just waiting for the drivers to come. Being a CPO, being a successful CPO takes a whole lot more than that. It's placement, it's your app, it's customer retention, it's offering deals, it's making sure that they're well maintained, they're covered in everything. And it does seem like in some places CPOs just figure, well, there's enough EVs out there now. I'm going to throw it down here in a reasonable location and then they're going to come. But there is so much more beyond that. Customer attraction, retention, quality, payments, everything that you need to put together to really run a successful charging business.
Exactly. It's quite a sensitive relationship with the customer at the moment because there is so much competition out there. And as soon as you have a bad experience at one specific charge point or with an operator, that's it. It's off. There's no need to go back there because there are other options as well. And so if you're not focusing on the experience, you're very much risking people not coming back. Even if you have 10 applications, people won't be coming back to you.
You're risking Felix stopping and having a shitty experience at your charger and then posting about it
trash talking it 15 years later.
Trash talking it and posting it to 15,000 people. And then, well, there goes your business. You could move markets, Felix. You could be moving markets with a couple of tweets or a LinkedIn post, right? And you got to stay on your good side.
Luckily, I will always focus on that, especially this pricing game is not where we need it to be. If we take the German market as an example, for many people who drive their diesel car fast every day to work or wherever they want to go, if you don't figure out the right charging deal in Germany, there will be no incentive to go electric at all. You will need to charge more. This is basic science. This is just mathematics. And then if you don't want to figure out the right way to do it, then charging will be way too expensive. So this is a huge hurdle in a market like we see there. It is the biggest car market of Europe. So if they don't fix that, we're in trouble.
Absolutely. All right, so Felix, we have one final question that we put to all of our guests, and I'm sure you can answer this with quite a bit of experience and knowledge. If you could bust one myth about EVs or the EV industry in general, or maybe just EV charging, what would that myth be?
I can only talk about price because that is also what got me here. And this is so hilarious because being from Amsterdam, I don't need a car in daily life, so I rent one when I need one. Can be a shared car or rental car. The line is diffusing. And the thing is that for years now, these deals out there have been amazing. So if you figure out the right rental deal compared to the right charging deal, I live in a country where people think that EVs are expensive. Open any newspaper in the Netherlands next week, they will tell you that driving electric is still expensive and electric cars are expensive. But if you simply rent one, they aren't expensive to rent, and they aren't expensive to use. So it just shows you that this idea that is still out there, people think that driving electric is sort of a luxury, and it is, but it's not an expensive luxury. And this just fascinates me every day again, that how can we be in this world where the reality is that my trip to Sweden, I cannot ever do it cheaper than by renting something electric and driving electric to Sweden, yet most people think that driving electric is expensive in the Netherlands today on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, I would always have to focus on this, that if you look at your usage and if you figure out, if you drive a lot in your whatever kind of fossil car, then you have been doing it wrong for years, almost no matter the country in Europe that you're in. And this will never stop fascinating me because I think we'll be here for years to come, that there's just this huge part of our at least potential audience that just doesn't realize that going electric can be the best decision of your life.
Amazing. Perfect.
I always thought the Dutch media were not being honest with me. I said, look, I can't trust those guys. I don't read a lot of Dutch media, but the times I have, I just can't trust them. No, it's true.
You just go straight to the EV price page.
Yeah.
You're fooling me again.
Page B7, I swear. They always have that article there. Yeah, it's true. That is kind of the dominant media narrative. And like you're saying, in many cases, there are great deals out there, and it's not as expensive as it once was, and it's kind of only going one direction for the most part, given battery price dropping, and as manufacturers are getting to a level where they're producing these at scale.
Yes, it's going down, but at the moment, it's fair to say they are, on average, more expensive. Maybe secondhand EVs are starting to kind of tip a little bit. But the other part is challenging the whole ownership piece, and that it doesn't always make sense to own an EV. There's still a lot of people that would prefer to do that, but there are other ways of using this mode of transport that can be much more cost effective.
Felix, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you for joining us, taking some time out of your busy charging and driving schedule. This has really been a pleasure.
Absolutely. Felix, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
And that will do it for the Summer Road Trip special edition of In Between Charges. I hope wherever you are driving this summer, you find a safe, reliable, and well-priced charge, and you enjoy your summer road trip to wherever you are headed. And we will be back next month with our final episode of Season 2. If you like what you've heard here, please like, subscribe on Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on LinkedIn or Instagram. We would love to hear from you. Safe driving and happy charging.